The alien. I hid for 24 hours, told me the truth about Jesus, and it shattered everything I believed about God. I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about the vibrational frequency that connects every living consciousness in the universe. The same frequency Jesus came here to activate. For 2,000 years, they've told us to worship in temples, but what this extraterrestrial revealed in my barn that night proved something far more dangerous. We don't need permission to access divine power. It's already inside us. Once you see what I saw, that glowing symbol on his chest, the way he spoke about Christ without moving his lips, there's no going back to comfortable faith. This will awaken something dormant in your soul, but it might cost you the safety of blind belief. If you're ready to question everything the church never told you about our place in the cosmos, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because what happened to Ethan McAllister in that Arizona desert didn't just change his life, it revealed why humanity was never meant to kneel. Now let me tell you how a wounded being from another world made me understand what Jesus really was. Ethan McAllister was 45 years old, a carpenter, divorced, living alone on the outskirts of Sedona, Arizona, where the red rocks stood like silent witnesses to everything he'd lost. The desert wind blew through the canyon at night. It carried memories, whispers of a life that used to make sense, a marriage that had crumbled like dried clay, a faith that had walked out the door with his wife, never to return. His cabin was small, wood and solitude. That's what it was made of. He'd built most of it himself, plank by plank, nail by nail, trying to hammer meaning into the emptiness. It didn't work, but he kept building anyway, because what else was there? The divorce had been finalized 3 years ago. 3 years of silence. 3 years of waking up to an empty bed and going to sleep with questions that had no answers. She'd left because she couldn't handle his depression anymore. That's what she said. "You're not the man I married, Ethan. You're a ghost." Maybe she was right. He felt like a ghost, haunting his own life. At night, when the silence became too heavy, Ethan would sit on his porch and read about the stars. He'd bought books on astronomy, cosmology, quantum physics, anything that promised answers about the universe, about God, about why everything felt so hollow. He used to believe, really believe. Sunday school as a kid, church every week as a young man. He'd prayed before meals, before bed, before big decisions. He'd asked God to save his marriage, asked for a sign, asked for anything. Nothing came. And so faith had faded like a candle left burning in a cold wind. One day it was there. The next day, just smoke. Now he looked up at the stars and felt nothing. Just distance. Just emptiness. Just the cruel mathematics of a universe that didn't care whether Ethan McAllister believed in it or not. "If you're out there," he'd whisper sometimes to the night sky, "you forgot about me a long time ago." It was a spring morning, 3:47 a.m. Ethan woke to thunder, except it wasn't thunder. The sound came from deep in the earth, a low, resonant hum that made the floorboards vibrate beneath his bed. It rolled through the canyon like a wave, deep and ancient, and then light. Green light, pulsing, rhythmic, like a heartbeat made visible. Ethan sat up in bed, his heart hammered in his chest. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "Storm," he muttered to himself. "Just a storm." But storms don't hum, and they don't pulse with geometric precision, and they sure as hell don't make the air smell like burning copper. He got out of bed. His hands were already shaking. He pulled on his jeans, his boots, grabbed his flannel shirt off the chair, found his flashlight in the kitchen drawer. The beam flickered when he turned it on. Weak batteries. Of course. He stepped onto the porch. The desert was silent. Not the peaceful kind of silent. The electric kind. The kind that makes your skin prickle and your breath catch. The kind that tells you something just changed in the world, and you can't undo it. The green light flickered again, down in the canyon, maybe half a mile away, near the old dried-up creek bed where he used to hike before the loneliness made even walking feel pointless. Ethan stood there for a long moment. Every rational part of his brain screamed at him to go back inside, lock the door, pretend he hadn't seen anything, call it a dream, go back to bed. But he didn't. Because curiosity is stronger than fear, always has been. And because, if he was honest with himself, part of him wanted something, anything, to break the monotony of his empty life. He descended the trail. Rocks crunched under his boots. The flashlight beam bounced ahead of him, cutting through the darkness like a blade. The air smelled different now. Metallic, like ozone after lightning, but sharper, stranger, almost sweet. His breath came faster. His pulse thundered in his ears. The closer he got, the more his hands trembled. The light grew brighter, more defined. It wasn't just glowing. It was pulsing, breathing. And then he rounded the final bend in the trail and saw it. At the bottom of the canyon, something was breathing light, not reflecting it, not emitting it, breathing it, in and out, like the glow was alive, like it had a heartbeat. Ethan stopped dead in his tracks. His flashlight beam landed on the shape, and his entire understanding of reality cracked open like an egg. This wasn't possible. This wasn't real. But it was right there in front of him, undeniable and impossible and utterly, terrifyingly real. Something had crashed in his canyon, and it was still alive. The figure lay crumpled on the sandy ground like something that had fallen from heaven and shattered on impact. It was translucent, almost liquid. Its skin shimmered in shades of blue and silver, rippling like water under moonlight, catching the faint starlight and bending it into colors Ethan didn't have names for. He took a step back, his breath caught in his throat, his flashlight trembled in his hand. This isn't real. This can't be real. But it was. God help him, it was. The being's chest rose and fell slowly, painfully. Each breath seemed to cost it something, and around it, the sand glowed faintly, as if the ground itself was responding to its presence. Ethan wanted to run. Every instinct in his body told him to turn around and sprint back up that canyon trail as fast as his legs would carry him, to get away from this thing, this impossibility, this violation of everything he thought he knew about the world. But he didn't run, because the being's eyes opened, and they were the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. They were vast, deep, endless, like looking into oceans that had no bottom, no shore, no end. There was no white, no iris, no pupil, just luminous, swirling blue that seemed to contain entire galaxies within it. And in those eyes, Ethan saw something he didn't expect. Peace. Not fear, not aggression, not the cold indifference of a predator. Just peace. Profound, absolute, overwhelming peace. His legs wouldn't obey him. He stood frozen, trapped between terror and wonder, unable to move, unable to think, unable to do anything but stare. And then the voice came, not through his ears, through his mind. "Help me. Do not fear." Ethan gasped. The sound was so gentle, so serene, like a thought that wasn't his own, but felt familiar anyway, like remembering something he'd forgotten a long time ago, like hearing his own voice from childhood, before the world had hardened him. His mouth went dry. His tongue felt thick. You're in my head. It is the only way I can speak. I apologize if it frightens you." Frightens? That was the understatement of the century. Ethan's entire worldview was collapsing in real time. Everything he thought he knew about science, about reality, about the universe, it was all wrong. All of it. And here was the proof, lying wounded in the dirt. But beneath the terror, something else stirred, something he hadn't felt in years. Compassion. The being was hurt. That much was obvious. A glowing wound ran along the left side of its torso, pulsing with faint golden light. Not blood, not exactly. More like energy leaking out, like watching a battery slowly drain, its life force spilling into the sand. Ethan swallowed hard. His voice cracked. What are you?" "A traveler, like you, just from farther away." The words were simple, too simple, but they carried weight. Truth. This being wasn't lying. It wasn't trying to deceive him. It was stating a fact as plain as the sky is blue. Ethan stared. His mind raced, trying to catalog what he was seeing, trying to make it fit into something logical, something that made sense within the framework of his understanding. It didn't fit. Nothing about this fit. But the being was suffering. And despite everything, despite the impossibility of it all, despite the fear clawing at his chest, despite every rational thought screaming at him to walk away, Ethan couldn't just leave it there. He'd lost his faith. He'd lost his wife. He'd lost his sense of purpose. But he hadn't lost his humanity. Not yet. He took a breath, steadied himself, stepped forward, extended his hand. "You would help me, even though you fear me?" "Yeah," Ethan whispered. "Yeah, I would." The being's fingers were long, delicate, elegant in a way that seemed almost artistic. When they touched Ethan's palm, they were cold, but not the cold of death, the cold of deep space, of distance beyond imagining, of places where stars are born and die, and yet there was warmth beneath it, a vibration, a subtle hum that resonated in his bones, a tenderness that felt alive in a way Ethan couldn't explain. It was like holding lightning that had learned to be gentle. "Okay," he said, his voice firmer now. "I'll help you, but we need to get you out of sight. Can you walk? With your help." "Yes." Ethan pulled the being to its feet. It was lighter than it looked, almost weightless, like lifting a shadow. Together they moved slowly up the trail. The being leaned on him, and with every step, Ethan felt that strange vibration again, like holding a tuning fork that resonated with something deep in his chest, something he'd thought was dead. Behind his cabin was an old barn. He hadn't used it in months, maybe longer. It was dusty, filled with scrap wood and forgotten tools and the ghosts of projects he'd started and abandoned. But it was private, hidden from the road, safe. The door creaked as Ethan pushed it open. The hinges protested with a rusty scream. The wood groaned under the weight of neglect. The being stepped inside, and as it crossed the threshold, the air changed. The barn filled with a faint golden glow. The dust particles in the air seemed to dance, catching the light like tiny stars. The old wood, weathered and gray, looked almost alive again, almost new. Ethan closed the door behind them. His hands were shaking. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst. He didn't know what he'd just brought into his life, but something told him, something deep and undeniable and terrifying and wonderful, that nothing would ever be the same again. Ethan had no idea what he was doing. He grabbed an old blanket from the corner of the barn, dust flying as he shook it out. His hands moved on instinct, not logic. How do you bandage a wound made of light? How do you help something that shouldn't exist? But he tried anyway. The being settled onto a makeshift bed of hay bales and worn canvas. Its breathing was labored, shallow. Each exhale released a faint shimmer into the air, like golden smoke dissipating into nothing. Ethan's heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. His pulse was chaos, arrhythmic, out of sync with reality itself. The air inside the barn smelled strange, sharp, like ozone after a lightning strike. But underneath that, there was something else, something that made his skin prickle. Fear, raw, primal fear, the kind that lives in your bones and whispers that you're in the presence of something far beyond your comprehension. He knelt beside the being. "I don't know how to help you. I don't even know what you are. Your intention is enough," the voice answered softly in his mind. "Compassion heals more than medicine." Ethan reached toward the wound. His hand trembled. As his fingers got closer, golden sparks danced in the air between them, little flecks of light that moved like fireflies, swirling, pulsing, alive. He pulled back. "What is that?" "Energy. Life force. What you call spirit." Spirit. The word hit him like a fist. He hadn't thought about spirit in years, hadn't believed in it. Spirit was something preachers talked about to fill collection plates. It wasn't real, it wasn't tangible, but here it was, dancing in the air. Undeniable. Ethan pressed the blanket gently against the wound. The fabric glowed where it made contact, absorbing some of the light. The being winced, or at least Ethan felt it wince, not through sound, but through that strange connection between their minds. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm trying not to hurt you. I know. You have a kind heart, Ethan McAllister." He froze. "You know my name. I know many things. I know you are lonely. I know you are searching. I know you stopped believing because you stopped feeling." Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't respond, couldn't respond, because it was true, all of it. Then something impossible happened. An old radio sat on a dusty shelf in the corner of the barn. It hadn't worked in years, no batteries, no power source. Ethan had kept it out of nostalgia. It had belonged to his father, and now it was humming. Faint at first, barely audible, but growing. A low melodic tone that didn't sound like static or interference. It sounded like music, like a frequency that existed outside the normal spectrum, like something ancient trying to remember how to sing. Ethan turned toward it, eyes wide. "How is that?" "All things vibrate," the being said. "All things remember their connection to source." He looked back at the being, and that's when he saw it clearly for the first time. On its chest, glowing softly beneath the translucent skin, was a symbol, a cross, but not just a cross. It was encircled, perfectly geometric, pulsing with the same rhythm as a heartbeat. Ethan stared. His mind struggled to process it. A cross on an alien being from another world. That symbol, he whispered. Why do you have that symbol? The being's eyes met his, those endless, oceanic eyes. You do not understand yet, the voice said gently. But you will. Love brought me here, Ethan. Not accident, not chance. Love. Love? Ethan's voice cracked. What does love have to do with any of this? Everything. Love is the only thing that ever mattered. The only force in the universe stronger than death, than distance, than time itself. The words settled into him like stones dropping into still water, ripples spreading outward, disturbing everything. Who are you? Ethan asked again, his voice barely above a whisper. I am a traveler of light, a messenger, a brother from a distant branch of the same tree. We are all children of the same creator, Ethan. You and I, the stars, the dirt beneath your feet, all of it, one. Outside, the desert remained perfectly still. No wind, no animals, no sound. As if the entire world was holding its breath. As if reality itself had become an accomplice to the impossible thing happening in this forgotten barn. Ethan looked down at his hands. They were still shaking. But the fear was changing, transforming into something else. Awe, reverence, a feeling he hadn't felt since he was a child, sitting in church believing, truly believing, that something sacred was present in the room. He'd forgotten what that felt like, but here it was again, after all these years, after all the doubt, after all the anger at a God who seemed to have abandoned him. Here it was. I don't understand, Ethan said, tears suddenly blurring his vision. He didn't know why he was crying. He just was. I don't understand any of this. You don't need to understand. You only need to feel. And Ethan did feel. For the first time in years, he felt something other than emptiness, something other than the dull ache of loss. He felt wonder. The radio continued its soft hum. The golden sparks danced in the air. The cross on the being's chest pulsed with life, steady and sure. And outside, the night held its secrets close, waiting for the dawn that would change everything. Before that night, Ethan McAllister believed in only two things: wood and matter. Wood was reliable. You could measure it, cut it, shape it, sand it smooth, join it together with nails and glue. It obeyed the laws of physics. It didn't lie. It didn't promise things it couldn't deliver. Matter was the same, solid, predictable, governed by forces you could name: gravity, friction, inertia. The universe was a machine. A cold, indifferent machine that ran on autopilot, grinding through its cycles without purpose, without meaning, without a damn care for the people caught in its gears. That's what Ethan believed. That's what made sense to him. Religion? Religion was something humans invented to cope with the despair of existence. A security blanket. A fairy tale for adults who couldn't handle the truth that when you die, you just stop. Lights out. The end. Nothing more. He'd tried to believe once. Really tried. He'd grown up going to church. His mother had been devout. She'd taught him to pray, to read the Bible, to trust that God had a plan. But where was God when his mother got cancer? Where was God when she wasted away in that hospital bed, her body betraying her one cell at a time? Where was God when Ethan's marriage fell apart? When his wife looked at him with disappointment and said, I can't do this anymore. You're not even here. You're just a shell. Where was God when Ethan prayed, really prayed, begging for help, for guidance, for anything? Silence. That's where God was, in the silence. If there is a God, Ethan used to think while sawing through planks of pine in his workshop, he forgot about me a long time ago. And so he stopped praying, stopped going to church, stopped pretending that the universe cared whether Ethan McAllister lived or died. He became a man of matter, a man of wood and nails and measurements, things he could control, things that made sense. But now, kneeling in this barn beside a wounded being from another world, something was moving inside him, something he didn't have a name for. It wasn't logic, it wasn't reason. It was deeper than that, older than that. Compassion. He looked at the being, this impossible translucent creature with a glowing cross on its chest, and felt something crack open in his chest, a door he'd welded shut years ago. And through that crack, Light was pouring in. He didn't understand it. He didn't know how to categorize it or measure it or explain it, but it was real. "Why me?" Ethan asked silently, not sure if the being could even hear his thoughts. "Why did you crash here? Why my canyon? Why my barn?" The response came immediately, gentle as a whisper. "Because love chooses those who doubt." Ethan's breath caught. His eyes stung. "That doesn't make sense," he said aloud, his voice thick. "I don't even believe in love anymore. I don't believe in anything." "You believe in enough to help me," the being replied. "You believed enough to risk your safety, to bring me here, to tend my wounds even though you are afraid." "That's not belief," Ethan argued, wiping at his eyes. "That's just, I don't know, basic decency. Decency is love in action. Compassion is love made manifest. You think you lost your faith, Ethan, but faith never left you. You only forgot how to see it." Tears ran down Ethan's face now. He didn't try to stop them. They came in waves, hot and unexpected, carrying years of grief, of anger, of loneliness that he'd buried so deep he'd convinced himself it didn't exist anymore. "I prayed," he whispered. "I prayed so many times, and nothing happened. Nothing changed. Prayer is not asking. Prayer is aligning. You asked from a place of lack, of desperation. Jesus taught differently. He gave thanks before the miracle appeared. He knew it was already done. He understood frequency." Ethan shook his head. "Jesus? You're talking about Jesus? Like from the Bible?" "Yes. You're an alien, from another world. How do you know about Jesus?" The being's eyes softened. The golden light pulsed brighter for a moment. "Because he was one of us." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Ethan stared. His mind reeled. What? Jesus was not only human. His consciousness originated beyond this world. He came with a mission, to teach, to show what is possible when a being operates from pure love, to activate the divine potential sleeping in every human heart. Ethan couldn't speak, couldn't move. His entire reality was folding in on itself, collapsing, rebuilding. That's impossible. You are sitting with an extraterrestrial being in your barn, Ethan, and you still think in terms of impossible. A sound escaped him, half laugh, half sob, because the being was right. Everything was impossible now. Everything was different. The skeptic in him wanted to argue, wanted to demand proof, evidence, logic, but the skeptic was drowning, being pulled under by something stronger, presence. The being was here, real, undeniable, and in its presence, Ethan felt something he thought he'd lost forever. He felt seen, not judged, not condemned, just seen, fully, completely, as if every broken piece of him was being held in hands that didn't need him to be anything other than what he was. "I don't know what to do with this," Ethan whispered. "You don't have to do anything," the being said softly. "Just stay. Just be here. Let yourself feel. That's all love ever asks." And so Ethan stayed. He knelt beside the wounded traveler. He let the tears come. He let the walls crumble. And somewhere deep inside, in a place he'd thought was dead, something small began to wake up. Not belief, not yet, but the possibility of belief. And for the first time in years, that was enough. The being lifted its eyes, and the barn exploded with golden light. Not harsh, not blinding, but warm, enveloping, like being wrapped in sunlight that had learned to be gentle. The walls dissolved into luminescence. The dust particles became stars. The old wood beams turned into pillars of radiance. Ethan gasped. His body froze. He couldn't move, couldn't look away. Images began to appear in the air around him. Not projected, not like a screen. They were there, three-dimensional, alive, floating in the space between him and the being like memories made visible. He saw deserts, endless stretches of sand glowing under alien suns, not Earth's deserts. These were different. The sand was silver, the sky was violet, and in the distance, structures rose, crystalline towers that hummed with energy, geometric and beautiful and utterly impossible. Then, the image shifted. Galaxies, spiraling arms of light stretching across infinite darkness, stars being born in clouds of cosmic dust, planets orbiting in perfect harmony, and threaded through it all, a web, a network of light connecting everything, every star, every world, every living thing. Then temples appeared, ancient, familiar, Earth temples, stone structures from civilizations long gone, and in each one, the same symbol, a cross, sometimes enclosed in a circle, sometimes standing alone, but always there, always present. Ethan's breath came in shallow bursts. His heart hammered. What is this? The being's voice filled his mind, soft but undeniable. This is the truth they hid from you. Another image formed, a man, walking through a desert, robes flowing, face obscured by light but somehow familiar, deeply, achingly familiar. Jesus, but not the Jesus from Sunday school paintings, not pale-skinned with flowing brown hair and gentle eyes. This Jesus was radiant. His entire body glowed with the same golden light that now filled the barn. His eyes held galaxies. His presence bent the space around him. Jesus came from a civilization of high consciousness, the being said, a place where love is not a feeling, where love is science, technology, the fundamental force that holds creation together. Ethan's mouth opened, but no words came. His mind was racing, trying to process, trying to categorize, trying to fit this into some framework that made sense. It didn't fit. He did not come to bring religion. The being continued. Religion is what humans built afterward, trying to contain what they could not understand. Jesus came to bring frequency. Frequency? Ethan managed to whisper. The vibration of unconditional love, the resonance that connects all consciousness. He came to show you that you are not separate from God. You are part of God, a spark of the same infinite light. The images shifted again. Now Ethan saw Jesus healing, but not like the stories described it, not like magic or divine intervention. He saw energy, waves of golden light flowing from Jesus's hands into the sick, the broken, the dying. And where that light touched, cells reorganized, disease dissolved, wounds closed. It wasn't supernatural, it was natural. It was how consciousness worked when it operated from pure love. Every being is a spark of the same divine light, the being said, its voice swelling with emotion now. Every human, every creature, every living thing across every world, all connected, all one. Tears streamed down Ethan's face. He didn't wipe them away. He watched like a child witnessing a miracle for the first time, like someone who'd been blind his entire life suddenly given sight. The cross on the being's chest began to pulse brighter, faster, in perfect rhythm with Ethan's own heartbeat. And then he felt it. Peace. Not the absence of conflict, not the quietness after a storm, but peace as a presence, as a force, as something alive and real and more solid than the ground beneath his feet. It poured into him through his eyes, through his chest, through every cell of his body. It filled the empty places he didn't know existed. It healed wounds he'd never named. Time stopped. Or maybe time had always been an illusion, and he was only now realizing it, because in that moment, there was no past, no future, no divorce, no loss, no pain. Only now, only this, only the heartbeat of the universe pulsing in perfect synchronization with his own. This is what Jesus came to teach, the being said softly, that you are never alone, that separation is the lie, that love is the truth woven into the fabric of everything. Ethan's legs gave out. He sank to his knees, his hands pressed against the dirt floor of the barn, grounding him, keeping him tethered to reality, even as reality itself was being rewritten. I don't understand, he whispered. How is this possible? You do understand. You always have. You just forgot. But your heart remembers, Ethan. Your heart knows. And he did know. Somewhere deeper than thought, deeper than belief, deeper than doubt. He knew. This wasn't myth. This wasn't religion. This wasn't superstition. This was science. Spiritual science. The mechanics of consciousness. The technology of love. Jesus hadn't been a religious figure. He'd been a teacher. A scientist of the soul. Someone who understood how reality actually worked and came to show humanity what they were capable of, and they'd killed him for it, then turned his message into something he never intended, built walls around it, made it exclusive, made it about obedience instead of awakening. But the truth was still here, still alive, still waiting to be remembered. The golden light began to fade. The images dissolved back into air. The barn became just a barn again. Old wood, dusty shelves, hay bales. But Ethan was not the same man who'd entered it. He looked at the being, at the cross still glowing softly on its chest, at those endless eyes that held more compassion than he'd ever felt from any human. "Thank you," he whispered. "Do not thank me. I only reminded you of what you already are." And in that moment, Ethan McAllister, carpenter, skeptic, broken man, understood. He wasn't witnessing a miracle. He was the miracle. He always had been. The wound was closing. Ethan watched in silent awe as the glowing edges of the injury began to knit together. Not like flesh healing, not like skin mending, like light remembering its original form, like energy finding its way back to wholeness. The golden luminescence pulsed gently, rhythmically, like a heartbeat made visible. And with each pulse, the tear in the being's side grew smaller. Ethan leaned closer. "It's not bleeding." "No," the being replied softly. "It was never blood. It is energy, life force. What some call chi, what others call spirit. It is the current that flows through all living things. And it's reorganizing itself? Yes, because energy always seeks balance, always seeks to return to its natural state of harmony. This is the law of the universe. Entropy is an illusion. Love is the organizing principle." Ethan stared. He'd built things his entire life. Cabinets, tables, houses. He understood structure. He understood how pieces fit together. But this was structure at a level he'd never conceived of. This was creation, happening in real time. "Faith is not belief in something outside yourself," the being said, its eyes meeting Ethan's. "Faith is remembering that you are not separate, that there is no outside. There is only one consciousness, one energy, one love expressing itself in infinite forms." The words settled into Ethan like seeds being planted in fertile soil. "Put your hand here," the being said, gesturing to the wound. Ethan hesitated. I don't want to hurt you. You cannot hurt me. You can only help me remember wholeness. Place your hand over the light." Slowly, carefully, Ethan extended his hand. His fingers trembled as they moved closer to the glowing wound. He expected heat, expected something to burn or shock or repel him. But when his palm made contact, all he felt was warmth. Gentle, pervasive, all-encompassing warmth. And then it happened. A wave of serenity crashed through him like a tidal wave made of peace. It started in his hand, traveled up his arm, flooded his chest, and spread throughout his entire body in seconds. Every muscle relaxed, every tension dissolved, every fear evaporated like morning mist under the sun. He gasped. His eyes went wide. It wasn't just physical, it was deeper than that. It was emotional, spiritual. It was as if every wound he'd ever carried, every heartbreak, every failure, every moment of loneliness, was being touched by something that knew exactly how to heal it. "Do you feel it?" the being asked. "Yes," Ethan breathed. "God, yes. What is this?" "This is what you are made of. This is your natural state. You have forgotten it because you were taught to live in separation, in fear, in scarcity. But this serenity, this peace, this is your birthright." Tears rolled down Ethan's cheeks. He didn't try to stop them. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of letting go, of finally allowing himself to feel something other than the dull ache that had been his constant companion for years. Outside the barn, the wind stopped. The desert fell into perfect silence, not an oppressive silence, a reverent one, as if the earth itself was holding its breath, honoring what was happening in this forgotten wooden structure. The old radio on the shelf, which had been humming softly all night, went silent too. Its job was done, its part in this impossible symphony complete. Inside the barn, two beings breathed in unison, one from a distant star, one from a small town in Arizona, both connected by the same thread of consciousness that runs through all things. Ethan's hand still rested on the being's wound, and beneath his palm, he felt it. The rhythm, the pulse, not the being's heartbeat, not his own, but both, synchronized, beating as one. "You carry pain you do not even know you carry," the being said gently. "Pain from this life, pain inherited from those who came before you, pain absorbed from a world that taught you to be afraid instead of loved." "I know," Ethan whispered. "I've tried to ignore it, tried to bury it. You do not need to bury it. You only need to let it go. Pain is not your enemy. Pain is a teacher, and when you have learned its lesson, it will leave. Well, what's the lesson? That you are worthy of love, that you always have been, that you never needed to earn it or deserve it, that it was always yours, simply because you exist. Something inside Ethan broke, not shattered, not splintered, but broke open, like a dam that had been holding back a river for decades, finally giving way. He sobbed, deep, gut-wrenching sobs that came from a place so buried he'd forgotten it existed. And with each sob, he felt lighter, freer, as if he was releasing weight he'd been carrying since childhood. The being placed its other hand over Ethan's. The touch was cool, gentle, infinitely compassionate. "Let it go," it whispered. "Let it all go." And he did. He released the anger at his ex-wife, the resentment toward God, the disappointment in himself, the belief that he was too broken to be loved, too damaged to be whole, too far gone to be saved. All of it, gone, dissolving into the golden light that now filled the space between them. When the tears finally subsided, Ethan felt emptied, hollowed out, but not in a bad way. In the way a cup must be emptied before it can be filled with something new. He looked down at the wound. It was almost completely closed now, just a faint seam of light where the injury had been. "You're healing," he said softly. "We both are." Ethan met the being's eyes, those impossible, beautiful eyes, and he understood. The miracle wasn't the alien in his barn. The miracle wasn't the telepathic communication or the glowing symbols or the visions of Jesus. The miracle was this moment, right here, right now. Two beings, two sparks of the same infinite light, recognizing each other, healing each other, becoming whole together. "The miracle was never outside you, Ethan," the being said softly. "It was always within, waiting for you to remember." And finally, after 45 years of searching, Ethan McAllister remembered. The being settled deeper into the hay, its form stabilizing, its light growing steady and calm. And then it began to speak, not with urgency, not with the need to convince, but with the patience of someone who has traveled across galaxies and learned that truth doesn't require force. It only requires presence. "There are worlds," it began, "where compassion is not a virtue. It is a science. Where beings study the mechanics of kindness the way you study physics. Where love is understood as the fundamental technology of creation." Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, his hands resting on his knees, his entire body still. He was afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly, afraid that any interruption might break the spell and this moment would end. In these worlds, prayer is not begging. It is not asking an external God for favors. Prayer is energy manipulation. It is the conscious alignment of your frequency with the frequency of what you desire. It is tuning your radio to the right station. The being's eyes glowed softly as it spoke, and Ethan felt each word land in his chest like a stone dropping into still water, sending ripples through his entire being. "Humanity forgot this," the being continued. "You forgot that love is not just an emotion. It is creative technology. It is the force that holds atoms together, the force that makes stars burn, the force that causes a seed to become a tree. Love is the engine of the universe." Ethan's throat tightened. And Jesus knew this. Jesus understood this completely. He was a master of frequency, a scientist of consciousness. He came from a civilization that had long ago discovered what your world is only beginning to remember, that thought creates reality, that emotion amplifies manifestation, that certainty collapses probability into inevitability. The words were almost too much, too big, too revolutionary, but they rang with a truth that Ethan felt in his bones. When Jesus healed the sick, he was not performing miracles. He was applying natural law. He saw God in everything, in the leper, in the blind man, in the woman caught in adultery, even in those who sought to kill him. And because he saw only wholeness, only divinity, only perfection, that is what manifested. Ethan's breath caught. He saw God in his enemies? Yes, because he understood that there are no enemies. There is only one consciousness experiencing itself from different perspectives. When you harm another, you harm yourself. When you heal another, you heal yourself. This is not philosophy. This is physics. The being shifted slightly, and the cross on its chest pulsed brighter for a moment, perfectly synchronized with the rhythm of Ethan's own heartbeat. Ethan could feel it. The synchronization, like two metronomes gradually aligning, like two tuning forks resonating at the same frequency. What you call faith, the being said gently, is simply attunement. It is the practice of aligning your inner frequency with the frequency of truth, of love, of the divine creative force. You do not need faith in the way your religions taught you. You need resonance. Resonance, Ethan repeated softly, testing the word on his tongue. Yes, Jesus never asked anyone to worship him. He asked them to follow him, to do what he did, to become what he was. He said, "These things I do, you will do also, and greater things than these." He was not speaking metaphorically. He was giving you a roadmap. Ethan felt tears threatening again. He swallowed hard. Then why don't we do those things? Why can't we heal like he did? Because you were taught that you are separate from God, that you are born broken, that you need an intermediary to access the divine. This is the great lie, the lie that has kept humanity small, the lie that has made you forget your true nature. The being's voice grew stronger now, more intense, though still gentle. You are not separate from God. You are God experiencing itself as Ethan McAllister. Every cell in your body is intelligent, conscious, divine. Every thought you think sends ripples through the quantum field. Every emotion you feel is a prayer being broadcast into the universe. You are not powerless. You have never been powerless. You only forgot. Ethan's hands trembled. He pressed them against his thighs to steady them. So what do we do? How do we remember? You start with love, real love, unconditional love, the kind that asks nothing in return, the kind that sees the divine in all things, even the broken things, even the ugly things. Because when you love like that, you activate the same frequency Jesus activated. And that frequency changes everything. The old radio on the shelf suddenly crackled to life again. But this time, it wasn't static. It was sound, melodic, harmonic, like voices singing in a language Ethan didn't understand but somehow recognized, like the music of spheres, like angels remembering how to sing. Ethan's breath caught. Do you hear that? The universe is always singing, Ethan. You are only now learning to listen. Outside, Sedona slept. The red rocks stood silent under the stars. Families dreamed in their beds. Cars sat parked in driveways. The world continued its routine, unaware that in a forgotten barn on the outskirts of town, everything was changing. But the cosmos knew, the stars knew, the earth itself knew, and somewhere deep in his heart, Ethan was beginning to understand that he'd been listening to the wrong voices his entire life. He'd been listening to the voices that said he wasn't enough, that said God was distant, that said miracles were for other people, for saints and prophets, not for broken carpenters in the Arizona desert. But now a different voice was speaking, an ancient voice, a true voice, and it was saying, "You are the miracle you've been waiting for." Ethan closed his eyes. Let the music wash over him. Let the being's words sink deeper into his consciousness. And he began to write, not with pen and paper, but with his heart. He began to inscribe every word, every revelation, every impossible truth onto the walls of his soul, because he knew, somehow he just knew, that this night would never come again, and he wanted to remember, needed to remember, so that when the morning came, when the being left, when he was alone again in his cabin surrounded by wood and tools and the ordinary concerns of ordinary life, he would carry this with him, this gospel, this truth, this memory of the night the universe opened its mouth and spoke directly to him, and he would never be the same. It was just past 4 in the morning when Ethan heard the sound. A low, distant thrum, mechanical, growing louder. His eyes snapped open. He'd been dozing against the barn wall, his body exhausted from the emotional weight of the night. But now, adrenaline shot through him like electricity. Lights, cutting across the sky. 2 of them, maybe 3, moving in formation. Helicopters. Ethan scrambled to his feet, his heart hammering. He moved to the small gap in the barn wall and peered out. The lights were still distant, maybe a mile away, sweeping the canyon with searchlights. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." Panic flooded his system. His mind raced. Had someone seen the crash? Had there been reports? Were they looking for the being? And if they found him, what would they do? Capture it? Dissect it? Lock it away in some underground facility where no one would ever know it existed? His breath came in short, sharp bursts. His hands shook. Every instinct screamed at him to hide. to cover the being, to extinguish any light that might give them away. He turned toward the being. It was watching him calmly, its eyes reflecting the faint glow of its own chest. "They're looking for you," Ethan said, his voice tight with fear. "We have to hide you. We have to—" "Ethan." The voice in his mind was so gentle, so serene, that it stopped him mid-sentence. "Fear creates what it fears." Ethan froze. "What?" "The energy of fear attracts what you are afraid of. It is a magnetic force. If you panic, if you broadcast terror into the field, you will draw them here. But they're coming. They are searching, but they have not found. And they will not find unless you believe they will." Ethan stared at the being, his mind struggling to process. "That doesn't make sense. That's not how—" "It is exactly how consciousness works. You have been taught that reality is fixed, that the world happens to you. But the truth is that you are constantly creating your reality with your focus, your emotion, your belief. What you fear, you empower. What you love, you protect." The helicopters were closer now. Ethan could see the beams of light sweeping across the desert floor, moving methodically, searching. "Do not protect the secret, Ethan. Protect the love. There is a difference." "I don't understand." "Hiding from fear is not the same as acting from love. One contracts, one expands. One gives power to what you do not want. One gives power to what you do want. Choose." Ethan's chest tightened. His mind was a hurricane of conflicting thoughts. Every logical part of him said to hide, to cover, to make the being invisible, to protect it from the world. But the being's words cut through the chaos like a blade. Protect the love, not the secret. He took a breath, then another, forced himself to slow down, to center, and then, for the first time in years, maybe the first time ever, Ethan prayed, not begging, not pleading, not asking God to intervene and save him from disaster. He simply gave thanks. "Thank you," he whispered aloud. "Thank you for this encounter. Thank you for this being. Thank you for the truth I've learned tonight. Thank you for protecting what needs to be protected." The words felt strange in his mouth, foreign, but also right, true. "Yes," the being whispered in his mind. "This is prayer, gratitude before the outcome, certainty that what you desire is already done." Ethan kept his eyes closed, kept breathing, kept feeling the gratitude expand in his chest like a warm, golden light. And then, something extraordinary happened. The barn itself seemed to breathe with him. The walls, the floor, the old wooden beams, everything pulsed in rhythm with his breath, with his heartbeat, with the being's luminous presence. It was as if the structure had become a living thing, a sanctuary, a temple. Outside, the helicopters continued their search pattern. The lights swept closer, closer. Ethan didn't move, didn't panic. He held the frequency of gratitude, of love, of certainty, and then the helicopters changed course. The lights veered east, away from the canyon, moving toward the highway. The sound of the rotors faded, grew distant, and then silence. They were gone. Ethan opened his eyes slowly. His hands had stopped shaking. His heart was still beating fast, but not from fear, from awe. They left. Yes, because you chose love over fear. You chose faith over doubt. And the universe responded. Ethan sank back against the wall, exhaling a long, trembling breath. Relief flooded through him, but it was more than relief. It was understanding. He hadn't hidden the being. He hadn't covered the light or tried to make it invisible. He'd simply changed his own frequency, his own vibration, and reality had shifted in response. "This is what Jesus taught," the being said softly, "that you are not victims of circumstance. You are creators of circumstance. And the key is always love, always faith, always the certainty that you are protected, guided, held by the same force that holds the stars in place." Ethan looked at the being. Its wound was almost completely healed now. Just a faint line of light remained where the injury had been. "You're going to leave soon, aren't you?" "Yes. My vessel is nearly restored. But before I go, there is more you must understand." Ethan nodded. He wasn't ready for this to end, but he knew it had to. All things do. The being settled deeper into the hay, its form glowing softly in the darkness. Outside, the desert returned to silence. The stars continued their slow wheel across the sky. And inside the barn, in that sacred space between worlds, the night became a temple. A place where fear had been transformed into faith, where doubt had given way to knowing, where a man who'd lost everything learned that he'd never lost anything at all, because the miracle was always inside him, waiting to be remembered. Dawn came slowly to Sedona. The sky shifted from black to deep purple to soft pink, painting the red rocks in shades of gold and amber. Birds began their morning songs. The desert stirred awake. Inside the barn, the being opened its eyes, and Ethan felt it smile. Not with its face, it had no mouth in the way humans do, but with its mind, with its presence, a warmth that radiated through the space between them like sunlight breaking through clouds. "My vessel is healed," the being said softly, "and my purpose here is fulfilled." Ethan's chest tightened. He'd known this moment was coming, had felt it approaching like the inevitable turn of seasons, but knowing didn't make it easier. "You're leaving." "Yes." Silence hung between them, not uncomfortable, just heavy with meaning, with everything that had passed between them in the span of a single night. Ethan swallowed hard. His throat felt thick. What do I do now? You've shown me all this. You've told me these things about Jesus, about consciousness, about love, but I'm just a carpenter. I don't know how to love." The being interrupted gently. "That is all you must do. Love. That's it. That is everything." The being rose slowly, its form stabilizing, becoming more solid, more defined. The translucent quality remained, but there was a strength to it now that hadn't been there before. A wholeness. "Protect life wherever you find it," it continued. "Speak kindly. Act with compassion. See the divine in all beings, even those who have forgotten themselves. Do this, and you will serve the Creator without needing to know you are serving. You will be the answer to prayers you never heard." The words landed in Ethan's chest like seeds being planted, not just heard but felt, integrated, becoming part of him. You do not need to build temples or gather followers or start a religion. You only need to love. And when you love truly, without condition, without expectation, you become a temple. You become a living prayer. You become what Jesus was. Ethan's eyes burned with tears. "I don't know if I can do that." "You already are doing it. You helped me when every instinct told you to run. You opened your heart when it had been closed for years. You chose love over fear last night when the helicopters came. You are further along the path than you realize." The being stood fully now, and the cross symbol on its chest began to glow brighter, brighter, until it was almost too intense to look at directly, like staring at the sun. But Ethan couldn't look away. "Jesus did not come to found temples," the being said, its voice swelling with something that felt like love and grief and hope, all woven together. "He came to awaken consciousness, to remind humanity of what they are capable of, to show that the kingdom of God is not a place you go when you die. It is a frequency you tune into while you live." The light from the cross expanded, filling the barn with golden radiance. Every shadow disappeared, every corner illuminated. "He came to show you that miracles are your natural state, that healing is your birthright, that you are not meant to kneel in worship, but to stand in partnership with the divine, to co-create, to remember that you and the Father are one." Ethan's knees gave out. He dropped to the barn floor, his hands pressed against the old wood, his body trembling. Not from fear, from the sheer magnitude of what he was feeling. He wanted to speak, wanted to say thank you, wanted to say goodbye, wanted to say, "Please don't go," but the words wouldn't come. His throat had closed completely, so he just knelt there, speechless, overwhelmed, undone. "You will carry this with you," the being said softly, "not as a memory, but as a knowing. And when you are ready, you will share it, not by preaching, but by being, not by convincing, but by demonstrating. You will be a light in the darkness, Ethan McAllister, and you will help others remember what they forgot." The being placed one long, elegant hand on the top of Ethan's head. The touch was cool and gentle and filled with such compassion that Ethan broke completely. Tears poured down his face. Sobs racked his body. And through it all, he felt nothing but love. Pure, unconditional, overwhelming love. "Do not mourn my leaving," the being whispered. "I am not going anywhere. I am returning to the space between all things, where I have always been. And you are coming with me, because you are realizing that there is no separation. There never was." Ethan looked up through his tears. The being's form was beginning to shimmer, to blur at the edges, like watercolor paint bleeding into paper. "Will I see you again?" The being's eyes, those infinite oceanic eyes, held his gaze. "We will meet again when you remember who you truly are. And in truth, we have never been apart." The light grew brighter, the form less solid, the presence beginning to dissolve like morning mist under the rising sun. "I love you, Ethan McAllister, as I love all beings, as the Creator loves all creation. Remember this, and let it guide you." "I love you too," Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. And then the being smiled one last time, a smile that Ethan felt rather than saw, and began to fade. The golden light intensified. The cross blazed like a star, and slowly, gradually, the being dissolved into pure luminescence, into light itself, into the space between everything, leaving Ethan kneeling on the barn floor, surrounded by radiance, his heart cracked open and overflowing with a love he'd never known was possible. The light didn't just fill the barn, it transformed it. A beam of golden radiance descended from somewhere beyond the ceiling, beyond the sky, beyond the stars themselves. It wrapped around the entire structure like a loving hand cradling something precious. The wood began to tremble, the walls, the beams, the floor beneath Ethan's knees. Everything vibrated with a frequency so pure, so high, that it should have been destructive. But it wasn't. Nothing broke, nothing splintered. The old barn didn't collapse or shatter. It simply resonated, like a tuning fork being struck by the hand of God. Ethan threw his arm over his eyes, the light too intense to bear directly, but even through his closed eyelids he could see it, golden, radiant, alive, and his heart felt like it was expanding, swelling, growing too large for his ribcage. He pressed his hand against his chest, gasping, wondering if this was what dying felt like, wondering if his heart could actually burst from too much love. But he didn't die. He just felt everything. Every emotion he'd suppressed for years flooding through him all at once. Grief for his lost marriage, gratitude for this impossible encounter, sorrow for the years he'd wasted in doubt, joy for the revelation that had been given to him. All of it, at once. A tidal wave of human experience compressed into a single moment. "We will see each other again." The being's voice echoed in his mind one final time. "When you remember who you are. When you look in the mirror and see not a broken man, but a divine spark wearing human skin. When that day comes, Ethan McAllister, you will understand that we never said goodbye, because there is no such thing as separation. There is only the forgetting and the remembering." Tears streamed down Ethan's face. "I don't want to forget. Please, I don't want to forget." "You won't. This night is written in your cells now, in your DNA, in the very fabric of your being. You cannot unlearn what you have learned. You cannot unsee what you have seen. You are changed. Forever." The voice was fading, growing distant, not because the being was moving away, but because it was dissolving into everything, becoming the air, the light, the space itself. Live, Ethan, love, and trust that every step you take from this moment forward is guided. You are never alone. You have never been alone, and you will never be alone. "Wait." Ethan reached out his hand, desperate to hold on to something, anything, but there was nothing to hold. Only light, only love, only the overwhelming presence of something so vast and so tender that it defied every word he knew. And then, silence. The golden beam withdrew. The light dimmed. The vibration in the wood slowed, then stopped. The barn became just a barn again. Old wood, dust motes floating in the early morning sunlight streaming through the gaps in the walls. Hay bales stacked in the corner, tools hanging on rusted nails. Ordinary, mundane, real, except for the glow. A faint golden luminescence still hanging in the air like the ghost of something miraculous, like the memory of light. The old radio on the shelf gave one final crackle, a soft, almost musical sound, and then went silent, permanently. Its mission complete, its part in this cosmic symphony finished. Ethan remained kneeling on the floor. He didn't know if he was crying or smiling. His face was wet with tears, but his mouth was curved upward. Grief and joy were so intertwined he couldn't separate them anymore. He stayed there for a long time. Minutes, maybe hours. Time had lost all meaning. Above him, through a crack in the barn's roof, a single shaft of morning sunlight broke through. It landed on his face like a gentle touch, warm, reassuring, a reminder that even though the being was gone, the light remained, the love remained, and it always would. Ethan finally opened his eyes fully. The barn looked different now, or maybe he was different. Maybe he was finally seeing things as they truly were, instead of through the lens of fear and doubt that had colored his vision for so long. The wood grain in the walls was beautiful. The play of light and shadow was art. The smell of hay and old timber was sacred. Everything was sacred, because everything was alive. Everything was consciousness expressing itself in form. The being had shown him that. Jesus had lived that, and now it was Ethan's turn to remember it. He stood slowly, his legs shaky, his body exhausted, but his spirit felt more alive than it had in decades. He walked to the barn door and pushed it open. The desert morning greeted him. Cool air, the scent of sage, the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. Sedona stretched out before him, the red rocks glowing in the early light like ancient sentinels guarding mysteries they would never speak aloud. And Ethan understood finally that he was one of those mysteries, that every human being was, that the greatest miracle wasn't out there in the stars or locked in ancient texts. It was here, in him, in everyone. The kingdom of God wasn't something to seek, it was something to remember. He took a deep breath, let it fill his lungs, let it expand his chest, let it remind him that he was alive, that he was here, that he had been given a gift beyond measure. And he whispered to the morning, to the desert, to the universe itself, "Thank you." 2 simple words, but they carried everything. Every ounce of gratitude he felt, every bit of love he'd been shown, every truth he'd been given. Somewhere high above, the hawk cried out, a sound of freedom, of wildness, of life lived fully, and Ethan smiled. Because he knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that he would never be the same man who'd climbed down into that canyon 12 hours ago. That man had died in the night, and in his place stood someone new, someone awake, someone who'd seen beyond the veil and could never pretend it didn't exist. He turned back to look at the barn one last time. Just an old structure, weathered wood and rusty nails, but also a temple, a sanctuary, a place where heaven had touched earth and shown a broken man that he'd never been broken at all, just sleeping. And now, finally, he was awake. The sun rose over Sedona like a declaration. Golden light spilled across the desert, turning the red rocks into flames that didn't burn. The sky transformed from deep indigo to soft lavender to brilliant turquoise. The world was being painted new, stroke by stroke, color by color. And Ethan stood on his porch, coffee cup in hand, watching it all with eyes that saw differently now. Everything looked sharper, more vivid, more alive, the way things look after a fever breaks, or after you've been given a second chance at something you thought was lost forever. He set the coffee down, didn't even take a sip. His body was buzzing with too much energy to need caffeine. He needed to go back to where it started, back to the place where the impossible had crashed into his life and shattered everything he thought he knew. Ethan walked down the trail toward the canyon. His boots crunched on the gravel. His breath came easy, steady, matched to the rhythm of his steps. Birds sang in the scrub brush. A lizard darted across the path and disappeared into a crack between stones. Everything was ordinary. Everything was miraculous. The trail wound down, down, down into the canyon, past the rocks where he'd first heard the sound, past the bend where he'd seen the green light pulsing, past the place where he'd stopped and almost turned back because fear had nearly won. And then he reached the bottom. The place where the being had lain wounded, the place where everything had changed. There was no ship, no wreckage, no evidence that anything extraordinary had ever happened here, just sand and rock and the quiet morning. But there was something, a circle, pressed into the sand like a signature left by the universe itself. The grains were smooth, polished, compressed into a perfect geometric shape, maybe 15 feet in diameter. Ethan stepped closer, knelt down, ran his fingers through the sand. It felt different, lighter, like it had been blessed by something passing through. He sat down in the center of the circle, cross-legged, hands resting on his knees, eyes closed. The air felt different here, thinner, maybe, or thicker. He couldn't find the right word, but it felt sacred, like the space between breaths. like the pause before a prayer. Inside him, something new was breathing. Not something foreign, not something added, but something that had always been there, finally given permission to exist, to be acknowledged, to be felt. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, Ethan didn't feel alone. Not because someone was with him. The being was gone. The barn was empty. He was the only human for miles. But he wasn't alone. There was a presence. Everywhere. In the rocks. In the wind. In the silence itself. A consciousness that permeated everything, held everything, connected everything. And he was part of it. Had always been part of it. Would always be part of it. The loneliness that had followed him like a shadow for 3 years. The crushing, suffocating isolation that had made him question whether life was even worth living, was gone. Not because his circumstances had changed. He was still divorced, still living alone, still the same Ethan McAllister with the same life, the same cabin, the same workshop full of half-finished projects. But everything was different, because he was different. He opened his eyes, looked up at the sky, so impossibly blue it almost hurt. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for showing me. Thank you for not giving up on me." The words felt inadequate, too small to contain what he was feeling, but they were all he had. He sat there for a long time, just breathing, just being, just allowing himself to feel the presence that had always been there, waiting for him to notice. The sun climbed higher, the shadows shortened, the desert warmed, and then Ethan spoke again, not to anyone in particular, maybe to the being, wherever it was now, maybe to God, maybe to himself. "Love is the language of all worlds," he murmured. The words felt true, truer than anything he'd ever said. Love wasn't just an emotion humans felt. It was the code running through all of existence, the frequency that connected galaxies and atoms and everything in between. Jesus had spoken it fluently. The being had spoken it fluently. And now Ethan was learning, word by word, breath by breath, heartbeat by heartbeat. The fear that had lived in his chest for so long, the fear that he was broken, that he was unworthy, that he was too damaged to ever be whole again, had left. It had departed with the stars, dissolved with the dawn, evaporated like water on hot stone, and in its place something else had taken root. Faith, not the kind of faith his mother had tried to teach him, not the kind that required belief without evidence or obedience without understanding, not the kind that made you feel small and sinful and dependent on something outside yourself. This was different. This was faith as knowing, as certainty, as the deep, unshakable awareness that he was held, guided, loved by the same force that kept the planets in orbit and the stars burning. This was faith that didn't need proof, because it was felt in every cell. Ethan stood, brushed the sand from his jeans, took one last look at the circle pressed into the earth, and smiled, because faith had finally come home. Not to a church, not to a doctrine, not to a religion, but to him, to his heart, to the space where it had always belonged. He turned and walked back up the trail, the sun warm on his shoulders, the wind cool on his face, his footsteps steady and sure, and behind him the circle remained, a mark in the sand, a reminder that the impossible was real, that miracles still happened, that the universe was far stranger and more beautiful than anyone dared to believe, that love was real, and love was enough. In the spring of 2022, Ethan McAllister was reborn, not physically. His body was the same, still 45 years old, still scarred and weathered by time and heartbreak, still carrying the same hands, the same face, the same bones. But his spirit was new. He continued his work as a carpenter, got up every morning, made coffee, went to his workshop, cut wood, sanded edges, built tables and chairs and shelves for people in town who needed them. But everything had changed, because now every plank of wood was a prayer, every measurement was an act of devotion, every nail driven was an offering, every smooth surface created was a meditation on perfection, on wholeness, on the divine geometry that existed in all things. He didn't talk about what had happened, didn't tell anyone about the being or the barn or the night that changed everything. People wouldn't understand. They'd think he was crazy. They'd try to explain it away or dismiss it or worse, turn it into something it wasn't. So he stayed quiet, let his actions speak instead. and people noticed. "Something's different about you, Ethan," Mrs. Henderson said when he delivered her new bookshelf. "You seem lighter." He just smiled. "Maybe I am." "Did you find religion again?" she asked, curious. "No," he said gently, "but I found something better. I found presence." She didn't understand, but she felt it. Most people did. There was something about being around Ethan now, something that made them feel seen, valued, loved without condition. He'd become a living example of what the being had taught him, not by preaching, not by proselytizing, but by simply being, by showing up fully in every moment, by treating every person, every creature, everything, as a sacred expression of the divine. Sometimes, when he was working alone in his shop, he'd see it, a shimmer in the air, a brief glow of golden light in the corner of his vision, like a reminder, like the being checking in, like the universe winking at him and saying, "We see you, we're still here." And Ethan would smile, whisper a quiet "thank you," and go back to his work. He understood now what he'd been doing that night. Hiding the being hadn't just been about protecting it from the world. It had been about protecting himself, about giving himself permission to believe in something bigger, about creating space for the divine to enter his life without the noise and judgment and fear that came from sharing it too soon. He'd been hiding God until he was ready to see God, until he was ready to become the thing he'd been searching for. And now he was ready. The love the being had shown him, the unconditional, overwhelming, infinite love, wasn't human, but it wasn't alien either. It was bigger than species, bigger than planets, bigger than galaxies. It was universal, the fabric of existence itself. And Jesus had been that love in human form, not the only expression of it, but one of the clearest, one of the most powerful, a being who'd mastered the frequency of love so completely that his very presence healed, his very words transformed, his very existence awakened others to what they were capable of. Ethan had spent years thinking Jesus was a myth, a story, a fairy tale, but now he understood. Jesus was real. Not in the way the church taught, not as a sacrifice on an altar, not as a ticket to heaven, not as someone to worship from a distance. Jesus was a frequency, a vibration, a consciousness that anyone could access if they tuned themselves correctly, if they chose love over fear, if they saw the divine in all things. And every human being who truly loved, who truly, deeply, unconditionally loved, was part of his return, not as a second coming, but as a collective awakening, as humanity remembering what it had forgotten, that they were never separate from God, that the kingdom was within, that miracles were natural, that love was the answer to every question. Ethan started a practice. Every evening, as the sun set over the red rocks, he'd sit on his porch, watch the sky turn from gold to orange to deep purple, and he'd speak the words aloud. "I and the Father are one," not as blasphemy, not as arrogance, but as truth, as recognition, as the simple acknowledgement of what he now knew to be real. He was not separate from the divine. He was an expression of it, a unique note in an infinite symphony, a single brushstroke in a masterpiece that spanned universes. And so was everyone else. The people who cut him off in traffic, the ex-wife who'd left him, the politicians he disagreed with, the criminals on the news. Every single one of them, divine sparks playing out their roles, learning their lessons, growing toward the light. All of them, part of the same whole, part of the same love. Ethan's life didn't become perfect. He still had hard days, still struggled sometimes, still felt the weight of being human in a world that often felt heavy and dark, but he was no longer alone in it. He was held, guided, loved by something so vast and so tender that it defied comprehension, and that made all the difference. Years would pass, seasons would change. Ethan would grow older, his hair would gray, his hands would become more gnarled and weathered, but the light inside him would never fade, because once you've been awakened, once you've seen beyond the veil, you can't go back to sleep. You can only move forward, one step at a time, one breath at a time, one act of love at a time, until the day you leave this body and return to the light, and realize you never left it at all. That night in the barn had been the end of one life and the beginning of another. And as Ethan sat on his porch, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky, he whispered into the evening air, "Thank you for everything." for the pain that led me here, for the loneliness that opened me, for the being that reminded me, for the love that saved me. And then he understood, really, truly, finally understood, the simplest and most profound truth of all. God had never abandoned him. He had simply forgotten how to love. But now he remembered, and everything was different. Everything was sacred. Everything was love.